Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Today, within the new initiative that we call GEO, Latin America and the Caribbean, Latin America in the new geoeconomic order, basically we have our second event. We are extremely glad to have Cecilia Malmström, former EU Commissioner for Trade and Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. She will talk on the new trade order emerging worldwide, the EU's position and strategic responses, and the implications and opportunities for Latin America and the Caribbean. Together with Cecilia, we will have two of our fellows, one of them in person and the other one online. Online, we have Nicolás Albertoni. He's a visiting fellow at Georgetown Americas Institute. He previously served as Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay from 2022 to 2025. He has, many books. He has many PhDs. He has many masters. He looks young for all this education. Some of those masters and I think the masters here at Georgetown. And he has been a very influential academic in Uruguay and an important thought leader on trade issues in Latin America. Also, we have Anthony Estedrio, who is a resident fellow at Georgetown Americas Institute, where he leads a project, Latin America in the Global Economy. He's also a senior research fellow at Barcelona Institute of International Studies. He held senior positions at the IDB, including the IDB representative in Europe, the head of Migration Initiative and manager of Integration and Trade Sector. Just to finish my introductory remarks, let me briefly read you Cecilia's short bio. She's a former member of the European Commission and the European Parliament. She joined the Peterson Institute for International Economics as a non-resident fellow in June 2021. She's the host of a very widely heard podcast that is called Trade Winds, or an event series, no? Not a podcast. It's an event series. And she's also a visiting professor at the School of Business, Economics, and Law at the University of Gothenburg. She has worked for the most part of her career on global affairs and international relations and has extensive experience with multilateral leadership and cooperation. She served as European Commissioner for Trade between 2014 and 2019 and as European Commissioner for Home Affairs from 2010 to 2014. She was first elected as a member of the European Parliament in 1999, serving until 2006, and was Minister for EU Affairs in the Swedish government from 2006 to 2010. As European Commissioner for Trade, she represented the European Union in the World Trade Organization and other international trade bodies. She was responsible for negotiating bilateral trade agreements with key countries, including Canada, Japan, Mexico, Singapore, Vietnam, and the 4 founding Mercosur countries. Cecilia holds a PhD in political science from the Department of Political Science at the University of Gothenburg. Thank you very much, Cecilia, for being with us today. I think you will give an initial presentation, or you will just jump into a conversation. Perfect. So we'll just jump into a conversation with Anthony and Nicolás online. Thank you very much.
Yes, let me just thanks Alejandro for the introduction and invite Cecilia to the podium to make an initial introduction. As you know, I think this is a very timely conversation. We will have a major event in a couple of weeks in Santa Marta in Colombia, the EU CELAC. So I think it's a very timely discussion with Cecilia about the state of the relations between the European Union and Latin America in a time of big transformations. We want to know from Cecilia her views of course, from a European perspective, where we are on all this new trade environment and how we got here and maybe where are we going. So why you don't first do this initial introduction, 10, 12 minutes, and then we'll start the conversation. Thanks, Cecilia, for coming.
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you, Alexandra, for the invitation. Good afternoon. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here in your beautiful campus. Thank you for inviting me and to kick off this discussion on Europe, trade, Latin America. And let me start by just setting the scene a little bit, because it's important to understand how Europe is trying to act right now. Europe is struggling to find its place in this new turbulent world, marked by mainly two big shifts. The first, and that's not the subject of today, but I need to mention it, is the death of the European Security Order with the brutal invasion of Russia in Ukraine. And this is, of course, a tragedy in every sense. A big country attacking unprovokedly an independent state with the only goal to eradicate Ukraine as a nation, as an identity, as a culture. And it has, of course, led to Ukraine fighting bravely, but also Europe had to redefine itself. It's a peace project, the European Union, and now it is arming itself and focusing very much on defense and security. And this is a new state of mind. The second big shift is the death or the weakening or the coma of the transatlantic partnership. For 80 years, the European Union and the US have had a very close cooperation, has had ups and downs, obviously, but there has been this big community of value and shared commitment to democracy and the rule of law. And when after the Second World War, do we have a technical problem? No, okay. After the Second World War, when the new international order was built, the World Bank, the IMF, GATT, and later became a WTO, the World Trade Organization, NATO, United Nations. This was all under American leadership, but very much supported and done together with Europe. And this relationship has been important. And today, many Europeans consider it as under a lot of strain. There is a lack of trust, both when it comes to security, which is related to the first issue, and also we see now the highest tariffs since the 30s between us, which is, of course, changing a lot how we cooperate with each other. And this coincides, or maybe it's a cause of it, that international organizations, the ones I mentioned, but many others as well, are very weak today. The plurilateral order, the multilateral order is under stress, and the rule-based economy, the rule-based way of doing agreements is under a lot of pressure. So how are we trying to adopt in this new beautiful world of tariff? Well, that is, of course, creating turbulence on the markets. We have the 232 tariffs where national security has become a very important part of trade today. And then we have the so-called reciprocal tariffs that were announced on the so-called Liberation Day. This creates challenges to trade, and it has led to slightly reduced trade, but I think it will recover. Trade is like water. It is finding new ways, and we are seeing new partnerships as well. For the European Union, we trade for more than $4 billion a day with the US. A day. That's huge. And the transatlantic economy employs 16, 17 million people. So this will continue. There might be cracks in that, but it will continue. We have tried to do a trade agreement between us, but that has not been successful so far. So what did the European Union do? Well, it made a deal or an agreement. It's not really a deal because it's not legally binding, but you have read about it. There will be a sort of general 15% tariffs on goods exported to the US on the EU. The EU has committed to invest 600 billion euros. But of course, the EU cannot invest, the EU institution. It is companies in the EU who have made estimations of their projected investments the coming years. It would be hard to follow up and to monitor, but it's an estimation. And the EU has committed, as member states, to buy energy and weapons from the United States worth 750 billion euros as well. Right now, the EU is trying to do its part of this because it has also promised to eliminate tariffs from the US. And that is a proposal that has been sent to the member states and the European Parliament, the co-legislators of the European Union, which will eliminate tariffs on American goods and quite a lot of agricultural products as well. We'll see how that goes. The European Parliament has threatened to veto it. The other strategy is, of course, to find new friends. You mentioned in your introduction, Alejandro, that we have trade agreements with a lot of other countries, and we do. But we're also, as Europe, trying to expand that network. Because trading is not only, facilitating trade, creating jobs and investment and growth. That is an important part. But it is also bringing countries and companies and individuals closer to each other. And basically everybody right now is trying to, how can we diversify from the US? Some even call it de-risking from the US. How can we find new partners? How can we establish new ways of trade? And this is what is being done right now. We're just about to sign an agreement with EU Mercosur. We'll come back to that. We have updated an agreement with Mexico. We are, as Europe, negotiating with Australia, with the Arab Emirates, Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, India, just concluded an agreement with Indonesia, and seeking closer tie with the CPTPP, the acronym of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Very important work on alignment will be done there. And trying to secure value chains and de-risking from the US in general, but also from China. Then, of course, another important part is to do our own homework, making sure that our own economy becomes stronger. I don't know how much you study the European Union, but there's a lot of activities right now to try to focus on competitiveness, on innovation, on simplification, on combining the green transition with competitiveness. Because Europe is lagging behind both China and the US. So this has to be done independently who sits in the White House and what happens. And this is hard and difficult work, but it is ongoing. It is also creating new alliances within a framework that we call Global Gateway. It's a partnership with third countries, a strategy to boost digital, energy and transport sectors, but also focus on strengthening health, education and research. And within that project, so to say, there is also a lot of emphasis on rare earth and metal partnership with other countries. It's a kind of Belt and Road a la European. And so far, they have the first years, 21 to 24, 300 billion euros, more or less the same in dollars, were mobilized. And of them, 31 billion euros were invested in Latin America and in the Caribbean. Digital trade platforms, sustainable forest management in the Amazonas, green hydro project, vaccines, water management, electrification in remote areas, etc., etc. And this brings us to our topic of today. Latin America and the European Union has, of course, a very long relationship. Some of that is a very difficult and painless colonial history, obviously, but the last decades has been focusing on cultural, political and economic close ties. And this partnership is becoming more and more strategic, especially in a world where geopolitics is dominating everything. Latin America obviously is not a homogeneous region, but the EU has agreements, trade agreements or partnership agreements with 27 of the 35 countries of the Caribbean and Latin America. The EU is the largest investor in the region, the largest provider of development assistance, and the third largest trading partner. We have common summits, both between individual leaders in Europe and in Latin America, of course. But you mentioned also the EU-CELAC summit upcoming now in 2 weeks in Colombia, which is going to be a very strategic moment for leaders to talk about the future. And then we have these trade agreements. Mercosur has been in the making. The EU-Mercosur agreement is a trade agreement between the whole of EU and the 4 founding countries of Mercosur. It's been in the making for 25 years. I thought I concluded it when I was Trade Commissioner. We celebrated after 5 days of the final negotiations, non-stop. We called for pizza at 3 o'clock in the morning, the third night. And we thought we had concluded it in June 2019. But there were new stumbling blocks and new difficulties and new negotiations. Now it is done. And if all goes well, it will be signed in Brazil the 5th of December. And this will be a landmark. This is an agreement between 800 million people who share a lot of common values and a common willingness to facilitate trade and investment and relations between us. So I really hope this is going according to the plans. There has been difficulties. It's not done yet. but hopefully. Also, an old agreement with Mexico has been updated, upgraded, also expected to be signed at the end of the year or beginning next. There's no date set for that. And both these agreements are not only trade agreements, but they also come with a bigger partnership agreement, which includes other areas of cooperation, everything from migration, security, sustainable development, research, etc. We have one in Chile that has entered into force just shortly, and we have a preferential agreement with the 14 countries in the Caribbean as a group, the CARIFORUM. And we have agreements in Central America and the Andean relationship. So this is a strategic relationship, an interest to facilitate trade between us, to diversify from other dependencies, the US, but maybe others as well, because trade has become so much about security and geopolitics. The EU wants to remain open to trade and investment, but it is also struggling with the de-risking from the US, but also the increased challenges coming from China, who subsidize a lot of its industries and who are now dumping a lot of products on the global markets that they can't sell to the US. So the EU is trying to form a strategy to deal with this and struggling to maintain the balance between more strategic autonomy, as it is called, but also remaining open. And in this struggle, you need to find allies and friends who believe in rule-based trade and rule-based relationships. And I hope and I think that Latin America, of course, is heterogeneous, but can be an important ally in this regard. So I'm looking very much forward to that signature finally. That will come in 2 months. I think I'll stop there and we can talk a lot about more and WTO and multilateralism and others. But as an introduction, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Cecilia, for this great introduction to the topic. And I think what you said just at the end, I think one of the issues that you mentioned is this the weakness of the trading system. This is not only a weakness that we have seen due to the last year's shock. This is a kind of a structural weakness that has been going on for a while. So we have to distinguish between these underlying weakness trends that were there, that has obviously been accelerated by these geopolitical political shocks in the much more recent times. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about this, in particular one of the main institutions of this architecture, which is the WTO, which has been under strain for several years now. Now we know what the status is. So why you don't tell us a little bit about how you see this architecture, where it is now, what could be the future of the WTO? There's a lot of discussions about potential reform of the institution, but beyond that, what will be other types of instruments that will have to be put in place in order to, as you said, conduct this like trade, whether it's through what some people call more open plurilaterals. That's one way. There's a lot of issues related or that are being treated as a sectoral agreement, sector-specific type of agreements. So how you envision this kind of new architecture that somehow will have to do some reconstructive surgery here?
Yes, that's a very interesting and difficult question, of course, and you're absolutely right, and I should have been clearer on that the weakness of WTO is not Donald Trump's fault. Partly, but not only. It has been in trouble for a long time, and it has not really been able as an organization to face the modern challenges of trade, where trade also has to be seen as as a tool for the green transition, as taking into account the more and more digital trade that we are doing, not so much in commodities anymore, but more and more in digital. So it has been difficult to make big decisions and to modernize itself. It's a big organization of 166 countries, and it operates by unanimity. So that's, of course, the trouble. It has a very little budget if you compare to World Bank or IMF and so on. So there are difficulties, and it is an acute need of reform. There has been attempts to reform it. It's going very slowly. But it is still an important organization, because still I spoke to the Director General of the WTO just a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Ngozi Ingwala, and she said that even with the current turbulences, between 70-75% of global trade is still done under WTO rule, and that is important. And WTO has a function to, to monitor this, to serve as transparency and a forum for dialogue. But nevertheless, it is really in acute need of reform. That is not going to be easy. It will take a long time. So I think that what you suggest, that smaller groups of convinced countries, today it's very popular to talk about coalition of the willing, but that can move forward. And that is happening. There are groups of countries, like 70, 80 countries, who say we want to move on and to form new rules in digital trade. There has been an initiative actually taken by Rwanda on plastics. And we want to move on to see how we can limit trade in plastics. There has been an initiative that is dormant, but is now waking up again, to facilitate trade in technologies that are useful for the green transition. Not all members, but maybe 50 countries could join. And I think that's the way forward, to sit together and say, everybody's open, everybody can join, but if you don't want to join and look what's happening, fine, but don't stop the rest of us. So this is probably the way forward, to move towards these plurilaterals or joint initiatives, as they called sometimes, and at the same time try to map out the most necessary reforms. There will not be reforms overnight, but maybe a few things can be done gradually, because most countries actually want to have rules. And if we have no rules, it's the poorest countries who lose. And that is not a world we want to live in. The other one is, of course, sectoral agreements. And we see that more and more between countries. We see regional agreements being done. We have the CPTPP, which is the biggest example. And if the EU were to join or align, this would be a huge coalition of countries who share the same values and who are committed to the trading system, and they could move on, they could go ahead to try to form new rules in certain areas. There has been smaller groups of countries who also trying to facilitate the digital and e-commerce trade. DEPA, it's led by New Zealand, Canada, Singapore, and one more country. Chile? Chile, yes. And now it has more members. So that is being done. And I think the EU-India trade agreement will not be a comprehensive trade agreement as the one we have with Canada or Japan, but it will be more limited. À la bonne heure. That's maybe something you could start with. So we have to find ways and move on, because the current climate is not really what most countries want, actually.
By the way, I haven't mentioned that, of course, we will try to have some time at the end for some Q&A here at the room. But also, if you are virtually connected, you can also use the chat to send some questions if we have the time. Let me just turn to a topic that also you mentioned in your introduction, which makes the news recently almost every day, which is the issue of critical minerals.
Yes.
This is an issue that has been in the news because of the role of China in kind of having almost a monopoly in refining these minerals, all the export controls that have been put in place for geopolitical reasons. Latin America has a huge advantage. It's has a huge endowment on this particular. I think the ITA computes that there are around 190 critical minerals listed, and 173 are exported by Latin America to Europe. And for some of them, European is the major importer from Latin America, copper, nickel, and all these type of things. So definitely Latin America has a huge advantage. I don't think it has all the potential fully developed. So the question is how you see the potential partnerships, even if we can go deeper in what type of instruments could we actually put in place to develop this partnership between the two. You mentioned actually the Gateway initiatives, the Global Gateway, that potentially provide some financial instruments to do that. So I'd like if you could comment a little bit on how you actually could extract this. There's I think a kind of a blueprint for that. I don't know the details. You may know a little bit about what the Europeans have signed with Canada and some critical partnership on critical minerals. Yeah. So how you see this area, which is critical for the energy transition that you mentioned also for Europeans, for Europe?
Absolutely. I think it's critical for the whole world. The whole green transition, the whole armament right now in weapons, the whole digital transition. We all use elements that are rare earth, and the dependence on this will increase with hundreds of percent only the coming years. And as you said, China is dominating that sector by owning, processing, or extracting the minerals. I think on average 85%, which is of course causing a lot of vulnerability, especially when it then decides to limit the exports and uses that as a way to weaponize trade. As we speak right now, or maybe it says no, the European heads of states and prime minister are meeting in Brussels for a so-called summit, and this is one of the points of the agenda to discuss how can we diversify, how can we become less dependent on China. And this is, of course, I think I haven't seen the agenda yet, but I'm sure this is going to be one of the main points to discuss in Colombia at the EU-CELAC summit, because you're absolutely right. Latin America has a lot of these minerals, and of course, you know, with the trade agreements, this is an important element for the European Union. This is not a secret. And if we can use, I mean, of course, facilitate trade, that is one first thing to do, but also if we can use, for instance, the Global Gateway financing and finding private-public partnerships to help extracting this in a more sustainable way, because mining is a very dirty business, but it's also very costly. So if we can find partnerships with big companies who are investing in that and doing it in a more sustainable and cleaner way, and also making sure that the countries can keep the revenues to a larger extent, because when China buys, it also takes the revenues in countries in Africa, for instance. So that we need to look at. There has been some good experiences from this EU-Canadian partnership, how you can do. We are also looking, of course, how to extract them in Europe, but it's complicated. The processes take decades, and it's very, very expensive and complicated. So I think this is an area where we can find a mutual, beneficial partnership between us to try, because it would also be in Latin America's advantage if they could, find cleaner way and help in processing and refining them in ways that creates alternatives that doesn't have to be dependent on China as well. So I think this is an area that is not easy, and it's complicated and dirty and expensive, but certainly a very important area where cooperation can only grow.
Let me move a little bit before actually turning into Nicolas, where you can have a conversation with him on EU Mercosur and other topics. On something that also you mentioned in your introductory speech, which is the architecture that has been built between Europe and Latin America in terms of FTAs. Mm-hmm. Europe is the major partner of Latin America in terms of FTAs, more than the US or any others. As you said, has agreements with 20 plus countries, mm-hmm. Almost everyone in the regions. Very important agreements with Mexico, with Chile, mm-hmm. with CARICOM, with Central America. The Mercosur is under ratification now. We here at the Institute, we published just a few weeks ago a document actually trying to be useful for the dialogue at the EU-CELAC on how to actually make the most of this architecture. Mm-hmm. Because one of the critical issues of this architecture is, guys, you have all these FTAs, but they don't talk to each other. A Chilean producer that wants to sell something to Mexico to do a joint production, that product from Mexico may not be able to be sold in the European Union under the Mexico-EU because of rules of origin that do not comply. So there's a lot of issues that, you can put this architecture to a step level. There's other experience. I mean, the way one of the major experience was the pan-European agreements before they joined the EU that tried to reconnect these FTAs. Any thoughts on that and how you can actually try to promote these convergence among different FTAs that they don't talk to each other? Clearly, the Europeans have a mover advantage here because that's the only partner that has agreements with everyone. No one else has this. How you see this potential mechanism for convergence?
Well, that's the backside of doing a lot of bilateral trade agreements and not doing them all in the WTO. You have this spaghetti bowl of trade agreements all over the world, and they're not really compatible, and they create a lot of problems in customs and rules of origin, especially for smaller companies. That cannot be solved easily. In an ideal world, of course, Latin America as a continent would develop some sort of internal market with the harmonized rules between them, and then we could trade as regions with each other. That would be ideal and also very beneficial. But of course, that could take a lot of time, and we know how hard it is to create an internal market. Even if we have one, we still have a lot of obstacles there. I think the key is the rule of origins. We need to work with that, but that is also one of the most trickiest things to trace and to monitor from the customs. But building up some sort of cooperation or starting a process, at least, where you could look at this. We have that process with the countries around the Mediterranean. It's going so, but at least it's not bad. So that, I don't know if that is mentioned in the paper. I haven't read it. Please send it. Yeah. That could be a very interesting thing to launch a process to see what can be done to align better the rules of origins in the different trade agreements.
In a way, when you think about, you mentioned the CTPP or even the RCEP, part of the way that these agreements have been built is through these processes. It's actually existing FTAs previously.
Yeah.
And the CTPP or the RCEP are just reconnecting agreements. Obviously, they are negotiating a new agreement, which is very complicated. Our proposal is a little bit more modest. It's trying to do things that do not require a full-fledged negotiation, something a little bit more similar to what has been done with the Northern African countries. So that's, I think, something that
would be interesting to read. Send it to me, and send it to the team in Brussels who are now packing their bags to go to Colombia.
Yeah. Actually, on this issue of convergence, I mean, beyond goods, there's the whole issue of digital services and so on. And maybe I'll be at time for switching to Nicolas to maybe ask a little bit more questions about this potential for convergence in other areas of trade, and also the topic of the EU-Mercosur, which is an important one for the region. Nicolas, you have the word. You have the floor.
Thank you, Tony. Hi, Cecilia. So great to see you virtually again. And I'm glad to be at least virtually with you guys. I would love to be there, but sorry for not being able to be in person there. And I would like to take a few seconds to thank you, Cecilia, for your hard work on the South American EU relations during and after your position as a EU Commissioner for Trade, because it's something that sometimes while you are on that position, it's part of your life. But from a South American perspective, I'd like to thank you for your hard work on that relation. That said, as Tony just mentioned, you were talking about regulatory convergence and global standards. And as Tony said, we are trading goods that is very concentrated in the debate right now. The EU, of course, advanced a new framework on digital regulation, climate trade, and also sustainable finance. But do you see a path toward regulatory convergence within Latin America and or the two regions, diverging trajectories? And how much you think that the EU-Mercosur agreement, that we will be talking more in a few seconds, could be a platform to do that?
Well, as we touched upon, and thank you for your kind words, and thank you for the constructive partnership of Chile in our trade relations. I think in the Mercosur agreement, there is a lot of room for regulatory convergence, both in the way that you sort of recognize each other's existing regulations, to say that you test your product so that it doesn't burn or that it does take flames in one way, we do it in another way, but they're equally safe. So we recognize each other's methods, so the companies don't have to do it twice. That is one way of moving forward. And also when it comes to new technologies and new areas in nano or in biotech or in life sciences, where we don't really have standards, sit together and discuss how can we put a joint, ideally international, because of course they're international institutions to do international standards, but how can we try to make sure that we don't build up parallel standards instead of agreeing on something similar that takes into account, of course, security, environment, and consumer health. So that is one way. And again, ideally, if there were joint standards on the Latin American continent, it would be easier to deal with. In the European Union, it's easier because we have the Commission. The Commission sets standards, and then they are valid for 27 countries, and some of them are in our surroundings as well. But I think the EU-Mercosur can be a start to do this, and then maybe it could trickle down to other countries who are aspiring to join Mercosur. I know Bolivia is in that process, but also with trade agreements within Latin America, that maybe could be taken into consideration.
Thank you.
Would it be interesting to hear, are there any attempts to do this? I mean, with the current tensions, we see more and more new initiatives being taken. And also the regional cooperation in Asia, ASEAN, they are taking huge steps forward actually to try to talk about these issues. And it has been difficult for decades, but now they're moving forward. So is there anything happening in Latin America in this regard that could be a similar process?
Absolutely. No, yes. The answer is yes, and indeed, from a Mercosur perspective and talking from a Uruguayan perspective more specifically, we have a lot of hope that, the benchmark that we're going to have with the EU and Mercosur, hopefully signed, this year. And I think will be a very important bridge that we're going to have in the following years to follow, because we need some standards, we need some regulation, and we need some framework. And I think this agreement could be a good lesson for that. Switching on the agreement in itself, and before talking about the signature and the ratification, I would like to hear more about your experience on the negotiation after so many years, in the front line. And you had been leading that negotiation from the European side. And indeed was a good platform to understand Latin America from the European side. So what lessons you can talk about and share with us after, these years of negotiation, I think between 2014 and to 2019, that you've been leading that. So what are the lessons that you can share with us? And then we can switch to more in the present and what could be the next steps?
Well, what are the lessons? The Mercosur EU agreement started 25 years ago, and they went off, and then they took a long break. And then finally we decided that it was time to look at it to see if it could, and I know Uruguay was pushing a lot for this, and Paraguay as well. The problem were rather in the big countries, which is totally normal because the political differences are bigger there. So I think what we learned was, the EU is always, we are entering most trade negotiations from a position of a stronger economy. So I think many of our partners sometimes feel that we are a bit arrogant and that we are not really listening to the concerns. I think we learned a lot during this process, seeing that we need also to be more humble and more modest. When it was easy to negotiate with Mercosur was when you four had your pre-meetings and that you had coordinated, this is what we have and ask, because we were negotiating with Mercosur as a group. And sometimes in the meetings was, well, this is what we want in our Uruguay, and we have this from Argentina, and Brazil thinks, yeah, but we need to have one position. So I think you maybe learned that coordinating gives you a stronger card, and we learned that we need to listen in the differences within the countries and then act from that position that finally emerges from that. And then, of course, you always learn about the different economies and the dependencies and the weaknesses and how many small and medium-sized companies there are in the region. Very few multilaterals, but a lot of smaller companies who need special conditions. And we also have in the agreement right now a specific chapter dedicated to facilitate for small companies on both sides of the Atlantic and the Pacific on how to facilitate, how to have non-stop centers where you can learn about what do I do as a small trading company who sells T-shirts or pens or what have you. So that I think was very, very useful for us to realize how dependent the economies are on many, many small companies.
Great
Then there
point.
are, of course, some very big as well, but overall, that was different from when you negotiate with Japan, for instance.
On the coordinating point that you just mentioned, was always difficult to admit from a Mercosur perspective that we were 4 and you were 27, but you only have one voice negotiating representing 27, and we have 4 voices representing the 4 members. So that shows sometimes how difficult it is from a South American perspective to negotiate that agreement. So turning now
you never saw the discussions I had with the 27 trade ministers afterwards when I had to defend the last concessions.
I can imagine it was not difficult for that. Only one person leading with the 27 behind the thing. No, but talking about the present and the future now, and it's my last question because we now want to have a Q&A with the people that is there in the audience. But you mentioned that you have this maybe goal of December 5th, this year. Sometimes when we talk with colleagues in Brussels, sometimes there's some noise in the line now that maybe, something could happen always. But it's really, we think, and the history of this agreement, maybe it's the last chance we have, because in October next year, we have elections in Brazil. And it seems, that we never get to that point that far. So also we really need to take advantage of the point where we are. But first of all is, okay, how close we are to this December 5th to be, to have a signature of the agreement. And then think a little bit on the next steps, just at least because after the signature, we have the ratification, and that will be also a very important political debates. And given that we have 3 pillars, and maybe you can share with the audience, how we want to work from a EU perspective, the 3 pillars: trade, politics, and cooperation in terms of the ratification. But first is, do you really think we're going to have in this semester finally the signing of the agreement?
I really hope so. And I think that the date of the 5th has been so spread. And 2 days before, there is a meeting of the ambassadors of the 27 countries, the so-called COREPER ambassadors, who have it on the agenda. They've had it on the agenda for a long time. We know there are difficulties in some countries in Europe. We don't need unanimity on this. We need a complicated system of qualified majority. I think the Brussels crowd has counted back and forth, and negotiations are still ongoing. So I really, really hope so, because failure to do this now after so many years with the current geopolitical situation, with friends and allies, with such a long history together, it would be a disaster. To fail. There will be a geopolitical disaster, and there will be other people sitting in some capitals laughing their heads off if we fail, and I don't think we can afford that.
And after the signing, how do you envision the ratification process? How going to be that political debate? That is difficult to imagine, but anyway, knowing more than me about Brussels.
Well, there's no secret that, for instance, in France, this is very controversial. I don't know if France will be able to vote in favor. I hope they could abstain at least. France has had some difficulties. They've had several governments coming and going. They still don't have a budget. And this is controversial. And also it is, Mercosur plays an important role in the domestic politics of France. A little bit less so, but still important in a few other countries. Austria, Poland, Netherlands have elections next week, but hopefully that will be over there. It is difficult, but we think we have the numbers, and I think it will go through. The European Parliament also needs to ratify it. My sources in the European Parliament say that it will be tough, but it will go through there. So once everybody has ratified it, it will enter into force sometimes next year, and then we could, we hopefully can start taking advantage of the benefits. But then there are also the 4 countries of Mercosur, of course, who needs parliamentary ratification. 4 is less than 27, so I guess it's a little bit easier. But I really hope we're here this time, because things have changed in the world. Trade is so much more now than just tariffs and market access.
Thank you. And it's interesting to know that, from the Mercosur side, the way of ratification is different. So we're going to have bilateral ratification. So the first ratified agreement can take and use the agreement, and once, of course, it's ratified from the European side. So I think will be a more efficient process, hopefully, from the Mercosur side. So once again, thank you, Cecilia. I get back to Tony now to lead the Q&A, and thank you once again for the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nico. And yeah, I think we have some time for Q&As. We'll start maybe here at the room. If there's anyone from watching online, and we'll check also the chat. Federico, we'll maybe collect like three questions or so. And yeah,
thank you.
He knows a lot about Mercosur.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Federico Steinberg, visiting professor here at Georgetown. No, I was going to ask about a broader issue. As you well know, the European Union trade policy has always been kind of accused from the global south of incorporating many things into the trade agreements, human rights, environmental sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. Now that the US is more engaged in agreements with Indonesia, India, these kind of countries, do you perceive that Brussels is somehow shifting, or they are still pushing for these issues as they did when you were commissioner?
Is any other one? Maybe I'll just take, I'll take maybe 2 or 3. Will be easy.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Haley Ordal, and I am a PhD student in the econ program here. My question has to do with one of the more controversial portions of GATT3 national treatment and how that's impacted trade relations over time. And so I was just wondering, how much different does your national treatment provision in the Mercosur agreement differ from the original WTO language, if it does at all? Thank you.
Shall I answer those first? Well, thank you, Federico, for that question. Yes, it is true that sometimes you've heard from our partners that the EU is pushing too far on some of the green issues and labor rights and so on. And I was accused at one big event of the EU doing green colonialism for the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and that is. The criticism has been heard, and now when it comes to the poorest development countries who are affected by these carbon border tariffs or fees, there has changed. So they would be too. Well, I think. I mean, trade is also about values. It's about how we trade. And most countries of the world have ratified international conventions where, committing themselves to some basic international principles in development, in endangered species, in labor laws, in not having child labor and so on. So what the EU does is to refer to those conventions that have been signed, not only implemented in a good way in every country, but at least they are signed and ratified in countries. So that's what's being done. And then sometimes it has tried to push it further. I think that is possible when the counterpart is okay with that. For instance, in the Mexico agreement, we have text on corruption, on trying to fight corruption in the public procurement contracts and so on. And that is, totally fine with Mexico. They wanted this because they think it will also help them with their domestic laws. And with other countries, we have language on trade and gender, or trade and animal health and so on. That is probably not what's going to be on the headline with our agreement if it is concluded with India, for instance. But the reference to these basic conventions will still be there. And with Mercosur, we have a very ambitious chapter on sustainable development. It was, the last few years have been dedicated to put a lot of energy in sustainable forest management, looking to the Amazonas as well. And it is also in the Indonesia agreement. There has been discussions on palm tree oil treatment and so on. So it is in, but I think the more activist part of it that maybe you could identify in the part will more be reserved to countries where you agree on that, and then go back to the basic, at least not formally controversial international conventions that has been signed. Yes, and then your question, sorry, on the most favored nation. Well, I don't have it in front of me, but what I hear from all the what has been done the last year with Mercosur is also the legal scrubbing. So our lawyers have gone through every little text, every sentence, and it is perfectly MFN. I mean, it is of course giving favorable treatment. Okay, sorry. I wrote MFN here, yes. No, I think that should be in total compliance with WTO fundamental rules, and then added as it is in favor national treatment in a trade agreement. Most favored nation is something else, of course. Sorry, I wrote that. And that is, well, we can question that in some of the agreements or trade or deals that has been done with the Trump administration. That is not most favored nation, the EU, US, unfortunately.
Another one here. Yep. Anyone? Good introduction.
Thank you so much for everything you said. I was wondering regarding, I know there is a deforestation law in the European Union, and I think it's starting to be applied this year. And in Mexico, I heard a lot of people who work with small producers, like with wood producers, that were very worried because they thought like their products like wouldn't be able to like be sold anymore and be traded because they couldn't comply completely with this new regulation. I would like to know your opinion about that, and if you have any comments, if you've heard things like that regarding that law.
The deforestation law has been postponed a bit now for the second time, so it's being more gradually phased in for different reasons. One is purely technical because the reporting mechanism is complicated and it requires computer and methodology that was technologically not ready yet, but also to facilitate for especially small companies to do and to increase the number of exceptions on the reporting for smaller companies, both European and others. Exactly where that landed, I can't tell you. I haven't looked at it the last week. Maybe someone else knows that. But I think the criticism that has come for smaller companies on the reporting, both outside the EU and in EU, has been taken into account. Will it be enough for what you have heard for them? I can't tell you. I don't know. Maybe you have looked at this the last, but there has been a lot of changes since 3 years ago when, with pomps and circumstances, we're going to enter into force, and lots of companies felt like, oh, wait a minute, we want to do it, but we can't.
I don't know if Nico wants to say anything from you were on the table in the last few years on this, or?
No, nothing much to add on what she said, but I think they are all relevant topics. In terms of the deforestation, it was something, related with the agreement and environmental issues in general. Indeed, the big difference between the 2019 negotiation and the concluding one we have last December was environmental, chapter. So yeah. Yes, it's a huge issue when we talk about, when we talk with Europe, this environmental agenda that, of course, is trying to be improving in Latin America.
And the add in the last year in the Mercosur agreement has also come with not only a much more ambitious and comprehensive chapter on the sustainable development and forest management, but also there has been specific fund set aside from the EU side to help, especially Brazil, but also the other countries, to do that transition and to invest in some of good forest management, because this is important for the whole world.
Anyone else?
Anyone online?
No questions online. So maybe just in this couple of minutes, maybe just Cecilia, maybe you could share with us what will be your best kind of outcome from the EU SLAC. What the thing that will make you happy, and maybe the things that you will make you unhappy that from that. And I think we could close with some predictions on what will happen in the next 2 weeks.
Well, I've left politics, so I won't be there. But I mean, emotionally, I feel very strongly about closer relationship between Europe and Latin America. So I hope that this is not going to be one of these summits where you just end with a joint statement that is very much blah, blah, blah. We all love each other and motherhood and apple pie. But something that is much more substantial, reflecting the current state of the world, where we talk about, yes, our partnership is not only historic and cultural, it is also strategic. And we want to make it even more strategic by identifying trade, by seeing how we can cooperate on some key areas, notably critical minerals and rare earth, which is, of course, environmental and the green transition. But I think it would be very nice, and if they could at least start a kind of process of looking at rules of origin and other obstacles that are making life difficult for traders. Even if we have these trade agreements, it is making it complicated. So starting some kind of process there would be a really, really good outcome, I think. And I hope that there will be. And I think what I've saw from the preparations in Brussels, they are committed to try to be, I haven't seen anything on rules of origin, but they are really preparing to do something ambitious. And I guess that's the same from Latin America. So we need to send a signal that we are committed to strategic partnership, but also upholding global rules and defending as much as we can the multilateral system.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. And I think this is an optimistic message. I think that we could end up here, because as going back to your initial remarks on the risk of fragmentation, which of course they are there, there also potential for convergence issues. There's some potential here for looking for a dynamic of convergence that we may have not seen. So I think looking at with some potential optimistic path moving forward, it's a good way to finish the conversation. So thank you very much, Cecilia, for your time to be here, and we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. We'll have to continue the conversation sometime in the future. And thank you, Nico, also for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nicolas.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.